So when you cross something out, like on a graffiti wall, if you cross it out, then it's, wow, that's them's fighting words, you know. But he did this on his own face. I'm putty in your hands. You tell me what you want to talk about, and I'll talk about it.
All right, I love it. Well, I appreciate it. I will just kick it off. Welcome, Father G. I call you Father G, but tell me, to everyone listening, what do you prefer to be called? What is the typical thing that people call you in the meeting?
People ask me that, and I don't really care, you know. A lot of people just call me G.
So I'll just say to those who are just tuning in, give them the story on who you are, where you grew up. I know you're from LA, and then what Homeboy Industries is.
So I'm from LA, and my parents were from LA, and their parents were from LA. So we kind of go back a lot of generations. But anyway, I was pastor of Dolores Mission Church from 86 to 92, and it's the poorest parish in the city, and had the highest concentration of gang activity in the world, and largest grouping of public housing west of the Mississippi. And we had 8 gangs at war with each other when I pulled up there. And I buried my first young person killed because of gang violence. He was stabbed to death in a gang fight in Hollenbeck Park. He was an identical twin. His name was Rafael. And then that was the first one I buried. And I'm going to bury my 237th on Saturday, a young man named Eric, who I've known for many years. So anyway, we did a lot of things. We started a school, and then a jobs program, and then a social enterprise thing. And anyway, Homeboy Industries was born in 88. And now we're the largest gang intervention rehab reentry program on the planet. So pre-pandemic, we had 15,000 folks coming through our doors. Not that many. I mean, we still have a lot of traffic. And everybody, we've been able to keep everybody paid and working. So it's kind of extraordinary that way.
That's great. I've been down there several times, not only to see Homeboy Industries in action and take a tour and obviously see all the wonderful things you do. And you just feel the community and the power of positivity and transformation when you walk in the doors. Can you paint the picture for those who haven't been there or don't live in Los Angeles of not what it's like during quarantine now, but what a typical day would be like for those who are part of the program? Kind of any picture you want to paint, but what a typical day looks like.
Yeah, so we have, you know, from all our, you know, places, from the silk screen and the recycling plant and the Homeboy Diner. So we have like 700 folks who work there. But every morning at 10 minutes to 9, we would have our, you know, 400 people packed into the reception area where we have our morning meeting, which kind of somebody recites the mission statement. And I miss all that stuff, you know, because it was sort of the glue. And, you know, sing happy birthday, and people will announce things like, you know, a homegirl will say, you know, I got my kids back yesterday. A lot of tears, a lot of applause. And so, you know, Homeboy is kind of, we're not that interested in folks surviving as the fittest, but thriving as the nurtured. And so people experience it as a palpably safe place where they feel cherished. And so if the principle is that a traumatized person, you know, is probably more likely to cause trauma, it's equally true that a cherished person will find their way to the joy there is in cherishing themselves and others. So it kind of that's our secret sauce. I mean, I think our cultural competence is an ability to hold folks who are really quite hurt and in pain and broken and wounded. And then they kind of discover the truth of who they are, you know, and they really do discover their truth in their true selves in loving, and they practice at it, you know, in a community of tenderness. So it's kind of the secret sauce, you know. I mean, we do all the other things, all the menu of things, anger management and classes and tattoo removal and 12-step stuff, which is all very important, but always secondary to the culture of tenderness.
Yeah, that makes sense. I thought about when you were talking about the menu of things. I don't know if it was in one of your books or an interview when you talked about the breakthrough for therapy based on one of the homies comparing it to Analyze This, the movie. That cracked me up.
Yeah. You mean analyze this? But prior to that, I mean, it really was, I had given up on trying to get homies to do therapy. It was so clear that if they could only travel with somebody who could unravel stuff, but it was always stigmatized, and they were resistant, and I'm not crazy. And then I tried to do group. Oh my God, I'm not going to say this and stuff in front of people. And then overnight, I mean, it's really, when you think about tipping points, it was a tipping point. I had one guy say it and 4 guys say it, and pretty soon, now for the first time in our history, we have 4 paid therapists, 49 volunteer therapists, including 2 psychiatrists. And for the first time in 32 years, we have a waiting list from among our trainees to get it to see a therapist. That never would have happened. And we never forced therapy. It was only, it's here if you're willing and able and ready. And so that's a good problem to have, the waiting list. So
I like that idea, and you've talked about that in the past of nothing feels forced, and you're meeting people on the margins in their lives, but you're not trying to change them. They're in essence changing themselves. I don't want to put words in their mouth, but can you talk about that idea? I mean, that was a beautiful way of you use the word awe, and you use that word more than empathy. So maybe can you speak on that a little bit?
yeah, it's funny. I've never juxtaposed it with empathy, because I think it's actually more valuable than empathy. I think so the notion is to stand in awe at what the poor have to carry rather than in judgment. So yeah, actually, I that's a new thought for me, to kind of rather than empathy, and,
Yeah.
and awe is just kind of otherwise, you get stuck in a narrative that says moral superiority, and that's not what this is about. It's bona fide awe at what people have to carry. And even, like in the ACEs study, which is the Adverse Childhood Experiences study, and it's a checklist of 10 things, and, parent mentally ill or in prison or sexual abuse, physical abuse. So, and it's 10 things, 5 that happen to you, and I think 5 that are kind of environmental or something, a divorce. Anyway, if you're a 4 or 5, experts say, if these things happen to you under 18, you're going to have health problems and socializing problems. And that's serious. I'm a 0 on the ACEs. I can't identify, there's not one thing I can identify. But every man and woman who walks through our doors is a 9 or a 10 on the ACEs. So, whoa, that you can't wrap your mind around it, and you stand in awe at it. And it's not even about empathetic connection. It's really about awe.
Absolutely. And you've talked, and obviously for those who haven't read your books yet, but I encourage everybody to read them and learn more. You talk about really the idea of no one joining a gang because they're going to do something, or there's no draw. It's more of that they're running from something. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, there's always, the outsider view has always driven the inside of our policy, but also our narrative, and how do you see this? So the outsider view always says, kids join gangs, wine women in song, join a gang, see the world, that they're being drawn to something, they're lured, they're attracted, and they're not. No kid is seeking anything when he joins a gang. they're all fleeing something. So, which is a telling diagnostic moment, so address the thing they're fleeing. There's a homie at the moment who's really so difficult and everybody's pulling out their hair. But behavior, we have to learn over and over again at Homeboy, don't get tripped up by behavior, because behavior is a language. And so then a homie named Robert, who always says, find the thorn underneath, which is, what is it? What language is this speaking? And so you look at this guy who's really hard and difficult and blows up and everybody wants to let him go. But then you find out that when he was born, his mom tossed him in a dumpster. And then you find out in a foster home somewhere along the line, maybe he was 4, he was set on fire. And we're just getting started, so you go, all right, now I want him to heal from that stuff. And I want him, but in the meantime, you let him explode, knowing that we'll pick up the pieces, we'll be okay, and with any luck, he's going to behave very badly in our presence. And that just means he's home, he's safe, until such time as he can put one foot in front of the next. Homeboy is like an AA meeting, who's there, people who are 20 years sober, 20 minutes sober, and somebody who's drunk, but they're there. And so it's okay, we got you, so.
Yeah, it seems like the welcoming arms and the community you've created. I mean, one of the things that I hear you talk about and that you've mentioned in the book is people who fall out of the program, and then you always welcome them back in. Is there sort of a guardrail around what gets someone out versus what they have to qualify for to come back in?
Not really, although I always tell homies when they'll come to me, kind of, they think I own a magic wand, and they'll come to me and I'll find out, that they were let go. And so they come to me and complain, and they're completely stunned. I can't believe I was let go. I said, dog, it is the hardest thing in the world to be let go from Homeboy Industries. So, but a lot of it is just, kind of a vague category we call non-compliance, which means we reach out to you. If you don't get back to us, we'll come back when you're ready, and so in the old days though, we used to always say, when somebody would get locked up again or leave or stop coming or relapse, and we'd say, well, maybe he'll be back. Nobody says that anymore. And the place is run by gang members now, as you know. And now everybody says, he'll be back. I mean, they always come back, because once they have a dose of being in a place where you're cherished, it's so compelling. And it's a kind of a secret, you kind of say, oh, that sort of unlocks a door for society. And then we kind of want to be, the front porch of the house everybody wants to live in anyway. But that's a telling thing, we really learned, just as in my early days, if a homie said, I'll work with my enemy, but I'm not going to talk to him. And I remember it kind of undid me. I go, oh my God, they're not going to talk. I would never think that now, because I go, fine, don't talk to them. But I know that human beings can't demonize people they know. You can't sustain it. And similarly, you discover that when somebody leaves, they got a dosage of something that will carry them, and they'll return. For sure they will. But all of it is progress. Even if only they completed a month of our 18-month program. And it requires you surrendering to your own healing. And people are in varying degrees ready to do that or not.
Makes sense. It reminds me of one of the stories of the guy with the face tattoo that you can mention that was baking croissants shoulder to shoulder with a rival gang member. I love that story.
Yeah, that was a kid named David who his house just burned to the ground yesterday.
Oh,
So it's
geez.
funny that you would mention him. He doesn't work for us. He has a construction job, but next door, a bunch of guys getting high and they set their house on fire, and it caught on David's house. They all got out alive, but it burned to the ground.
Oh,
But anyway, he's a wonderful kid, and somebody just now texted me, said that we got him a big old grant to help him in terms of relocation and furniture and stuff. Anyway, I digress. Yeah. But he had a bunch of tattoos, and one of his tattoo on his cheek were the letters of his enemy's gang, and then he tattooed a cross. So when you cross something out, like on a graffiti wall, if you cross it out, then it's, wow, that's them's fighting words, you know. But he did this on his own face, and so he was doing, you know, making croissants with his enemy from the gang on his face, you know, that the same gang, and they never spoke. They just made croissants until one day David had a day off, and he went into our tattoo removal clinic and just said, I want you to take this off. And it's a process, you know, a lot of treatments. And so he got that very first process treatment, and he went to the next day to bake croissants in silence until he turned to the guy and he said, hey, you know, and it was kind of red and raised and elevated. And he said, I'm getting this off. It's because of you. You're good people. And they went back to making croissants. So, you know, folks will say men work things out shoulder to shoulder. Women work things out face to face, which is my experience of the homegirls. But the guys kind of work stuff out that way. And I have endless stories of homies' cars breaking down, and they're calling their homies, and homies are saying, gee, I wish I could go. And, oh, I'm at this, you know, baptismal party at my mother-in-law's. I really can't leave. And the list is on and on. And then they'll say, and then I called Louis, my worst enemy in the whole world, but we make croissants together. And he said, you know, I'm in the middle of nowhere, my car broke down, and Louis says, I'm on my way. And does that always happen? Yes. You know, any exceptions? No.
Wow, that's great. Well, you said you just got a text. It's funny. I thought of how many entertaining texts you get, because I've heard you and I've been with you when you've gotten them. What's a surprising or funny or random text that you got in the last, let's call it, month, that you're entertained by? You don't have to be specific.
I know it's always the autocorrect thing. One pre-pandemic, I was really, you know, on a plane 3 times a week, you know, and giving talks, sometimes with homies, sometimes not. And Miguel, who's the head of our security, homie, did 25 years in prison, half of that in solitary confinement, if you can imagine. And so he was texting, it was very sweet, and saying, gee, I think you need to be home more. You know, we miss you here, and you're like the glue. And I mean, after all, you're the Gumby of Homeboy Industries. And I'm reading it and I'm thinking, I'm about to agree with him. When he texts me back, Gandhi, what was I thinking? Gandhi.
Classic. That's great.
Yeah, but I was really kind of, I really honestly was going, Gumby, you're the Gumby of Homeboy Industries.
That's
and
good.
I was trying to wrap my mind about what the hell could that even mean, you know, and then it was Gandhi.
I love it.
Which also says something about autocorrect, that they would, instead of Gandhi, they give you Gumby, you know, which is pretty weird, but.
Totally. Yeah, that's great. So you obviously, you see so much beauty in humanity. You see the goodness in everybody, which I love. What's something spontaneous or unexpected that's brought you joy recently whether it be a transformation or anything that you've seen that you've been happily surprised by?
Well, again, you try out new stuff, new material, as you say. Since I give talks virtually, it's not the same. But I have this guy Raul. When he came to us, he had been so severely beaten, he was in a coma, and so he was really quite off a little bit. And so, we all talk about a lot of times about neuroplasticity, so that the trauma that, in your body carries this really can be healed by kindness and tenderness and focused, attentive love. It can be healed. You can actually alter your brain. But when you're talking about really severe head trauma, as opposed to, the kind of emotional trauma, then what are we to say about that? So this guy Raul came to us, he's towards the end of his time, so it's probably 16 months ago. And he was kind of slowpoke, I can remember once, 6 months in, I saw him in a hallway at Homeboy, and he was crying. He was the only one in the hallway. What's up? Well, he had gotten an ATM card, and he pulled it out of his wallet and showed it to me. He's crying. And he said, I went to buy a burger at Burger King, and I handed him the card, and they handed me a burger. He's crying because he has an ATM card. I mean, it was so moving. But anyway, he's in our high school kind of program. He just got his high school diploma, and which is kind of extraordinary. And then I was talking to another staff about this, and we went, yeah, this place kind of healed actual, brain trauma, where he was so beaten so badly, left for dead, and in a coma, and survived. And yes, emotional trauma and PTSD, and we know that gets healed. Well, anyway, I say all that because today he said, hey, can you send me to a dentist? And he said to me, because when they beat me up, that they fucked up my grill, is what he said, And even though we all have masks on at the moment, and then he said, I've started to see that I like when I speak to people. And then he said this, I think my words have medicine in them. It just made me cry, because he went from this guy who could barely really rub two thoughts together to getting his high school diploma, to discovering that his words have medicine in it. And you just say, wow. I mean, it's kind of miraculous. And I feel badly because it's 18 months, and I'm not sure where he would go, but, I said, well, we can find you something, but Homeboy is home, and that's hard. It'll always be home. And I know this kid, it'll always be a touchstone. He'll always come back. But it doesn't get better than discovering that your words have medicine in them.
I love that. That's great. So when you talk about sort of the graduation from Homeboy Industries, so there's a finite period that people can be a part of the program. Is that what you're saying on that?
Yeah. So, I mean, of course, everybody wants to become core. And core happens, when, you're really good in the bakery and you kind of know what you're doing, so you can show other trainees how to do it. So that happens. And then sometimes people become senior staff, which we always need, case managers, navigators. Unfortunately, everybody wants that because they don't want to leave the nest, and I don't blame them. But unless people leave, it's hard to bring people in. So that's kind of a dilemma. And the odd thing is this kid Raul, because he's now so capable. He's kind of has moved into a place which is nice. But I could tell today he was kind of. They all come to me and they all hope that I'll wave my magic wand and yes, you are now senior staff and you'll never leave here except with a gold watch after 40 years. But hopefully we'll find something. It's funny lately, we've been getting these offers from big, kind of manufacturing outfits, places that are really operating. Yeah, we're hiring lots of people. So it's nice when they'll come to us and say, but we want to give special attention to your folks. So who knows?
That's great. So it sounded like when the program started that nothing stops a bullet like a job. Was that one of the original quotes or something
Yeah,
along those
because
lines?
we started school first, but then the gang members would say, if only we had a job. I always say that in the early days we listened to gang members, but later on we knew gang members, and so then it was easier to kind of, when we listened, we got them jobs. But once we knew them, we still did jobs in employment, but we knew it was more about healing than anything else. So it sounds kind of old and tired. Nothing stops a bullet like a job, because that was in the early days when lots of bullets were flying. And we were trying to make the case, what if we were smart on crime rather than tough? And so now it feels dated, but we still have the T-shirt.
But you talk about wounds and learning to love your wounds. I mean, obviously, you've worked with people who you stand in awe to because of all that they've gone through, horrific things that are just unbelievable, having read the books. But it sounds like, and don't let me jump to conclusions, but from hearing your talks, that sort of every human potentially has wounds that they need to address. Do you think that's a fair assessment, or is that in line with what you've thought?
Yeah, I mean, we're all human beings, which is to say broken and wounded and in pain. And, they say that if you're in pain, you point. And so it's kind of a scapegoating thing. But that's mainly about an unwillingness, at least for the moment, to make friends with your wound. So then what you're tempted to do is despise the wounded. And so everybody has that. So what it comes down to, though, is like vulnerability is the Velcro that attaches, that connects you to people. And it's really as simple as that. So once you can kind of live from that place that's center and soulful and where your heart is, then you're connecting to people. But like today, I don't know what it was. I was praying this morning, and it came up with this notion about seeing with the eyes of belonging. And so that's just a way of wanting to connect people. And the opposite of that, it's the notion of winning the argument. The opposite of winning the argument is seeing with the eyes of belonging, knowing that we all suffer severed belonging. We're all cut off always from liveliness. And so Homeboy is about attachment repair, but that's kind of what life's about. It's about how do you return people to belonging. The great John Lewis always spoke about, we all live in the same house. And he didn't quibble. He didn't say, some people live in the basement, some people live on the third floor. No, we all live in the same house. He doesn't say, one day we may live in the same house. No, that's what I love about it. We all live in the same house. So it's a discovery. It's not a thing that you aspire to. You discover that that's the truth, that we belong to each other. So how do you repair what's torn? and a belonging that's severed. And, you know, it's funny, I had these mantras, and that was my mantra today, to see with the eyes of belonging. And so, and I parked, and I've been going in the mornings, and it was an intentionality that changed my day, that it kept me anchored in the present moment, delighting in the person in front of me, and you could really see them. But because we're so busy wanting to win the argument, we don't see each other. And the homies always say, you know, we're used to being watched, we're not used to being seen. And then take that to the other level, which is to see with the eyes of belonging. And then you've really arrived at something.
Absolutely. You talked about a concept, now hear this, here being HERE. Can you talk about that? And is that a mantra that you tap into often?
Yeah, you know, it's a reminder. I always talk about you need to stay in the living room, which is why they call it living. You know, that's the kind of duty of delight. Who's right in front of you? Stay in the living room. Otherwise, you lament what happened yesterday, which is the bathroom, or you're anxious about tomorrow, which is the kitchen. Not to disparage those two necessary rooms, but the living room is where it's happening. And so how do you stay, you know, present? The other thing in this line of work is that people, they have a narrative, which is, oh, I guess I'm just too compassionate. I had a staff member say this the other day, and I go, no, hold the phone. You know, when you're getting close to burnout, it's only means that you've allowed this whole thing to become about you. And that's a temptation. You got to be careful. Otherwise, you know, you'll be depleted. But if it's about the other person and you're anchored in the present moment, now hear this, then it's eternally replenishing. You never burn out. Because if you go to the margins to make a difference, then it's about you. But if you go to the margins so that the folks at the margins make you different, then it's about us. You know, today, I'm telling you all these things that happened today, because it was a good day. You know what? A kid named Jonathan, who, again, has worked for us a number of times, he came back. Maybe it'll work this time. African-American, covered in tattoos, a hard kid, difficult kid. But, you know, he announced that it was his birthday. And so we're sitting in my office and we're talking. And so at the end, I just said, hey, you know, I'm glad you were born, which I've said a million times to a million homies. But he said, really? Why would you be glad that I was born? And it forced me to kind of, and I said something I've never said to a homie like this. I said, because you've altered my heart. You kind of broke it, and it got wider, and now it has room for more people. And you altered my heart. Well, he started to weep, and so did I. I mean, it was kind of, I don't know, it was a real gift. And he's a hard kid, but I'm glad he's back with us, you know. And that was his birthday gift. I gave him a start date, which is Monday. And usually you gotta wait longer. But I said, well, happy birthday, I'm gonna start you. But anyway, it was it's tough because we can't hug, you know, and in hugging, we're a real tactile place. So that's been a hard thing for everybody, because everybody does this kind of air hug at 6 feet away, you know.
Yeah. That reminds me of when you met with, maybe I shouldn't tell the story because it's giving away the punchline, but I just remember the feelings mutual, that quote of somebody who was difficult. Because you talked about how hard this
I gave him a blessing, and I was telling him how great he was. And
yeah, can you tell that story? I love because he didn't call it getting a blessing, right? Wasn't there a different term for it?
yeah, I mean, you know, people always ask me for blessings, and again, they still do, but it's at a safe distance. It's kind of weird. But he was a pain in the ass, you know. Well, I just blew the punchline, but he was such a difficult kid, and so anyway, so I was giving him a blessing, and it was his birthday also, and I said, you know, I'm glad you were born, and I'm a rich man because I know you, even though at times you can be a huge pain in the ass. And he looks up and smiles and says, "The feeling's mutual."
That's great.
Oh, I remember the two of us, we just laughed. But the meeting had not gone well because he could just be so annoying and so demanding. And again, all behavior is a language. So you kind of give it a, you know, a wide berth. Um, but I love that we both found that very funny at the same time, which doesn't always happen.
That's great. So two themes that I think about often when I think of you is or two kind of themes or words would be forgiveness, because clearly you're very forgiving about things that, you know, if someone's difficult, and then also patience. I mean, in your line of work, you certainly have to be patient. Can you talk about how you think about those two things? Because certainly there seem to be points when someone fades out of the program naturally. Maybe it's not a dramatic moment between you and them, or your staff and them, but maybe that idea of what forgiveness and, you know, the importance of those two things, patience and forgiveness.
It's interesting because you've read the book, so you might appreciate this. I was in Florida and I was gave a talk, and afterwards people lined up and I was signing books. And a guy came up and he had read both books, and he says, "You know, I noticed you never mentioned forgiveness in your books." And I sat there and I went, "You know, you're right, because I don't." And partly because I will say, um, why would we settle for forgiveness when we can have mercy? And that mercy for me is kind of a wider, more expansive, spacious notion. And I think it's a better place to be merciful than even forgiving. That, you know, like the prodigal son, which is sort of the classic story, the father runs to the kid. Now the kid thinks it's about forgiveness because he's memorized a fake ass speech. "I am not worthy to be your son. I have," and the father puts his hand over his mouth. "No, come on. This is mercy, not forgiveness." You know, you don't ever hear the father say, "Well, let me give you an accounting of what you did to me." No. And he never says, "I forgive you." He says, "We're throwing a damn party because you were dead and now you're alive, you know, and let the party begin." So I think that is better, you know, and, you know, I have an odd, I don't know if it's COVID or whatever it is, but I have like 5 people who want to kill me, which is really weird. And and some of them are homies, and some of them are people I don't know. Like I had a cop call me not long ago, said, "You know, we have to tell you this. There's some guy in the psych ward who voices are telling him to kill Father Boyle." And I don't know him, and he's never been to Homeboy, but that kind of comes with the territory. But also homies who are off their meds and are using meth and are kind of out of their minds, you know. So do I forgive them? It doesn't make any sense. But mercy kind of stands in awe at an anguish that I've never had to carry. Try wearing that all day, that kind of anguish. You know, so, but that's sort of an odd example, except that it reminds me of the invitation is to mercy, not to forgiveness. You might start there, but you don't want to stop there, because I think mercy is a richer thing. I mean, again, if we're invited to be in the world who God is merciful. I wouldn't say God is forgiving, because that's not even the language God speaks. That's language we speak with each other in the hopes that we'll get to mercy eventually. What was the other piece, though?
Patience.
Oh, yeah. Well, patience. I don't know. I don't know if I have as much as I would want, but yeah, I guess you have to have patience, but a lot of it, you never want to lose sight of who's in front of you. And you have to have a kind of healthy regard for mess, because it's always messy. And that's kind of the incarnational truth of things. So you just want to roll up your sleeves in the face of it, and you don't want to be troubled by it. It's so key to have a light grasp on things. Otherwise, you cling to certain outcomes. And if those outcomes don't happen, then you're toppled by it. And you never want to be toppled. You want to just, so if it all ended tomorrow, either in death or some kind of dissolving of something, you go, change of clothing is kind of how the Dalai Lama describes it.
Or death is a punk, as someone called it.
Yeah, that's right. Death is a punk. And you kind of want to keep it that way. Yeah.
Yeah. One of the things, so the idea of patience is also kind of a question of discipline. One of the stories there, I had a weird week a couple of years ago, and it was when I was right in the thick of reading Barking to the Choir, and I channeled my inspiration from you. I had two random things happen to me that again are nothing of significant consequence compared to anything that certainly people who you encounter on a daily basis have gone through. One was that I was sitting in my office, and someone who appeared to be homeless punched through the office window, and I saw his bloody hand with shard of glass, an inch from my face. And I was startled, and I quickly got out of the room and went outside to see what was going on. And I'll give you the conclusion there in a minute. And then the second story was, and it sounds like such a ridiculous story compared to everything you've gone through, but I was surfing, as I do often, and someone, I always put my keys in my towel when I go surfing and put it on the beach. And I've been doing that for 15 plus years. And someone followed me, took the keys out, emptied everything from my car, laptop, wallet, computer, all that. And I got out, and I had, none of my basic things. I couldn't drive the car because they tossed the keys somewhere. And in both instances, I think prior to knowing you or reading your book, I probably would have channeled my emotions toward anger, frustration, anger, whatever word you want to put on it. And I sort of just shrugged in both instances. And the takeaway that I had was, whoever did this is probably enduring a much harder life than mine. The first one, I thought of mental illness, because there was no incentive for somebody to punch through a window. And the second one, I thought of desperation and anything else. And I actually thought about it in terms of the fact that we had, I had a car seat in the back of the car and a bunch of my, at the time, 3-year-old's toys. And I thought, whoever did this didn't have the sort of moral compass or anything to see that and see that it was a dad's car, not to say that I should be treated any differently with being a dad and having my car broken into. But I just thought whoever did this needed whatever they took more than I do. And I'm going to file an insurance claim, and it's going to be a nuisance for 3 hours and for the next couple of days, but then it'll be okay. So my point in telling you this story, because I appreciate listening to you more than telling you these stories, is that that was a big impact that your lessons had on me. And so I guess the question is it okay to feel anger or frustration? Because it seems to require discipline. And I felt fortunate that I had that emotion. But do you get angry? Do you feel like people should be able to have that outlet of anger? Or should they always sort of, if something happens to them, accept it, knowing that there's a reason or whatever it is?
Well, I mean, I think, those are very compelling stories, and there's a kind of a logic. I mean, we can't sort of divorce ourselves from our human truth. And so anger is always an initiator, but it's not the thing that transforms. So the more quickly you can get to the place that can, like Plato used to say, everybody, you be kind to everyone because everybody you meet is fighting a hard battle. And that's hard to do in the moment because, who doesn't get pissed off? Who doesn't get annoyed? I do all the time.
Your book suggests otherwise. It doesn't
Well,
sound
no,
like you. No,
I
I'm
don't
kidding.
know. I mean, I do. I really do get annoyed, and the homies, they know that the thing that always sets me off is if you walk away from the battle, if you walk away from, we're having a conversation and maybe it's a hard conversation and you just get up and walk away and, oh, baby, the homies know that's, no, you don't do that. And I'll chase your ass down and get your ass back in here because you don't walk away from this. It's hard. It's going to be hard for both of us, but you don't walk away. Fuck this. I'm going to walk away. No, you don't do that. But everybody knows their own buttons. My friend Pema Chodron, who's if you've ever read her, she's wonderful and she's a friend and such a good person. She always talks about propensities, which is, you kind of know where your buttons are. And she always talks about catching yourself. And that's kind of what you do. You catch yourself, and it's a practice. That's why I like the whole spiritual journey is really a practice. I this seems silly, but the Mr. Rogers movie with Tom Hanks and the journalist who's kind of the central character turns to this woman and introduces themselves, finds out that it's Mrs. Rogers. And he's on a rope line and very attentive to all these people on this rope line. They're back. And he says to her, well, what does it feel like to be married to a saint? And she winces and she goes, oh, I don't like that term because it suggests, and she points at her husband, it suggests that we don't have access to what he does. And that's nonsense. And she goes, he gets angry, but he kind of knows how to deal with it. And then she says this, which for me has always stayed with me. She goes, he works at it. It's a practice. And I don't know why, that just stayed with me afterwards. I went, yeah, don't ever forget that you work at it and it's a practice. It's not about becoming a perfect person or even a better person. It's about catching yourself so that you can be a free person and freed from being bothered by stuff that, maybe used to derail me, but it doesn't anymore because I catch myself. But only if it's a practice, only if you work at it. Otherwise, it becomes a lofty, inaccessible thing, and it isn't. It should be part of the air you breathe, but you got to work at it.
Speaking of working at it, are there daily practices or rituals that you recommend people consider trying? I know it's fairly open-ended, but if someone wants to better themselves in any way, whether, all across the board, are there daily things that you recommend they do?
Well, I try to do my 50-minute walk every day, and I pray, and I try to read. I kind of dedicate myself to reading a little bit every day. Try to write every day. I try to always stay on top of, communicating, like with texting and emails and stuff. But that's sort of the main practice, But it's interesting, homie texted me just the other day and he says, hey, Pops, and they all call me Pops now. And he says, how can I be a better man? And it's a funny thing. It kind of broke my heart, And so I texted him back. I said, you couldn't be one bit better. And I think that's the truth. And I think we get caught in this thing of, I don't know what, progress or becoming better. I want to be better tomorrow than I was today. I don't think that's it. I think it's about seeing the truth of who you are, and discovering that where the joy is comes from living in your truth, to find your true self in loving. But it's not about being better, you know. When I was a kid at St. Brendan's elementary school, and the BVMs in the days when they wore these elaborate habits, and the nuns always drummed into us this ditty, and it was good, better, best, never let it rest until the good is better and the better best. And so the idea is this progression, maybe after best you arrive at saint or holy, but I think it's like we got thrown out of the garden and we're trying to crawl our way back, and it's no, who you are is unshakably good. That's your truth. Now, how do you live from it? How do you have access to it? How do you remove the things that impede you from seeing that that's your truth? But it's not about homies becoming better. I never think that way. And I never talk that way with them. It's about who you are. You are exactly what God had in mind when God made you. And so watch people become that truth once you've pointed it out to them.
And as far as people sort of finding themselves in their calling per se, I mean, I think a lot of people at a basic level want to know what they're best suited to do, whether it be with their career or what they should focus more on. Is there any sort of exercise or thought behind if someone is in sort of a funk as far as not knowing what they should be doing, whether it be what their calling is in life or a job, what a first step would be to sort of find themselves?
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, a lot of times people, talk about God and talk about God's will, and you'd be amazed, how many people, and this has happened a fair amount, and it's always kind of startling to me. Someone will show up at the office and say, God put it on my heart to leave my home in Oklahoma and come here and work at Homeboy. I always think to myself, I wish God had, sent me an email telling me you were coming, or um, somebody who did that. I mean, again, it's happened many times. It's kind of an odd, and it's a testament to Homeboy, and I'm glad for the appeal, but it's kind of like, is that how it works? And this guy came in and said, and God brought us to Los Angeles, like God as travel agents, and I go, no. So, but the flip side of that is sometimes, we think that God's will for you might be different than what you most deeply want for yourself. And the trick, of course, is they're always the same. They're never, I want to, do this, but God is calling me to do that. No, it doesn't work that way. Now, the trick is don't be a stranger to yourself. So to know God's will is to know what you most deeply want. So it's tough, because then it's career versus what do you most deeply want, and you hope that those things are closer than not, but you go where the life is, and that's where people always need to be. What gives you life to the fullest, and that's where you need to be. And not to spiritualize it, but people do all the time, and I think it's always important to, take your temperature and kind of say, is this me at the fullest? And if it is, then you're in the right place.
That's great. And there's a memorable story, if you don't mind telling it, about the young man who wore 3 T-shirts, and he was the one who found himself after the process. I know we've talked about earlier about wounds, but after sort of learning to either love or accept his wounds, if you don't mind telling that story.
Well, it was, we were speaking to 600 social workers in Richmond, Virginia, and I had two homies with me, Jose and Andre. And Jose got up first. He was 25 years old, been to prison, tattooed, gang member, but he also had a long stretch as a homeless man and an even longer stretch as a heroin addict. And he was a trainee, and he was probably in his 9th month and had really become a very valued member of our substance abuse team. Well, anyway, he got up in front of 600 social workers. I never heard his story, and he said, I guess you could say my mom and me, we never got along so good. I think I was 6 when she looked at me and she said, why don't you just kill yourself? You're such a burden to me. Well, 600 social workers audibly gasp, and then he says, it sounds way worser in Spanish, he said. And people, we got whiplash going from gasp to laugh. And then he continued, he said, I think I was 9 when she drove me down to the deepest part of Baja California, and she walks up to an orphanage and she knocks on the door, and the guy comes to the door and she says, I found this kid. And she left me there for 90 days until my grandmother could get out of her where she had dumped me, and my grandmother rescued me. And then he said, my mom beat me every single day of my elementary school years with things you could imagine and a lot of things you couldn't. Every day my back was bloodied and scarred. In fact, I had to wear 3 t-shirts to school every day. First t-shirt because the blood would seep through, and the second t-shirt you could still see it. Finally, the third t-shirt, you couldn't see any blood. The kids at school, they'd make fun of me. Hey, fool, it's 100 degrees. Why are you wearing 3 t-shirts? And then he stopped speaking. He was so overwhelmed with emotion, and he seemed to be staring at a piece of his story that only he could see. When he could regain his speech, he said through his tears, I wore 3 t-shirts well into my adult years because I was ashamed of my wounds. I didn't want anybody to see them. But now I welcome my wounds. I run my fingers over my scars. My wounds are my friends. After all, how can I help heal the wounded if I don't welcome my own wounds? And awe came upon everybody. And people moved away from a sense of judgment to a place of holding. We say that a lot at Homeboy about, people are held, which is a nice verb, because that's exactly what it is. And if you don't welcome your own wound, you will be tempted to despise the wounded.
I feel like we could all benefit from that in this current day and age. I mean, it feels like a recurring theme is being able to understand where someone else is coming from, and without getting into politics or anything else. I mean, is when you see 2 polarizing communities, obviously you see it with rival gangs, but if you see 2 people who come from completely different perspectives, what would be your advice to them to sort of potentially reach some form of a happy medium?
I think it's really quite simple. Sometimes we always feel like you have to talk stuff out. And it's, again, like, men work things out shoulder to shoulder. But I was on a panel in DC once, and there was some guy, African-American, who was part of the urban policy, something or other, for, it was the last year of Obama's presidency. And it was young people. And I was on a panel with him, and somebody asked him, it was sort of like, what do we do? Basically, your question, how do we resolve these things, and what should we be doing, and what can we do? And I don't remember what his answer was, except for the fact that he said this one word that sort of sat there in the air. and the word was vicinity. He just said that. He just said vicinity. And I knew exactly what he meant. I don't know if his audience did, but I knew exactly what he meant because, yes, vicinity. So it's like going to the margins is vicinity. You have to put yourself there. You don't go to the margins to bring people, assimilate people, or bring them back to the center or to whiteness or something. No, you go to the margins and you stay there because it's about vicinity. And it's on the same principle of, you can't demonize people, but once you're in the vicinity of somebody else, divisions tremble and they can't be maintained. And it's really that simple. I don't think it has to be, let's work this out. Let's talk about all the wrongs or allow me to win the argument. But it's really about having, seeing with the eyes of belonging.
I love it. So this last section will be kind of rapid fire questions. What do you love about California?
I like the diversity. I love the beaches. I love the food. You just go over here and have that, and go over here and have that. It's kind of miss all that stuff at the moment.
So everybody listening to this or watching this needs to go to Homeboy Bakery. There's one at Homeboy Industries, and then there's obviously one in LAX still. Is that correct? There's 2 locations?
Yeah, LAX is a kind of a dicey proposition right now, but that'll happen.
Yeah. So what's the best thing on the menu if people come down to Homeboy Bakery? What do they need to order? What's your favorite item?
Well, everybody raves about the coffee cake at the bakery. At Homegirl Cafe, the chilaquiles and all we have kind of a new menu of sandwiches because we're kind of, you come to the front and you pick up your stuff.
And now, if you were to promote another restaurant or two, what are some hidden gems in LA? Like what's your favorite taco spot in downtown LA or anywhere?
We used to always walk down to Olvera Street to El Paseo, and they have a margarita called the Mega. And oh baby, and I would walk in like with staff, and we just so many times we had such a good time there. And I always have the chile verde, which is wonderful. And so I would always walk in with several staff people, and I look over at the bartender, and he always gives me a little extra something inside my Mega.
I love that I asked you about your favorite taco spot, and you answered with the Mega Margarita. I didn't ask you where to get the best cocktail in LA.
Yeah, but like also tacos. King Taco is really quite good all over. There's so many on the east side. It always depends on where I am, which one to swing by. So,
love it. And what's you take your 50-minute walks? What are your favorite areas to walk around in LA?
I always do the same. I drive over just past Homeboy, and there's the California State Park there. And but I'm there. So I get up at 2:30 in the morning. So I'm going to say goodnight after I hang up with you. But
yeah.
So I get up really early. So I'm there quite early. Sometimes if I take the walk later, like on the weekends, I'll actually get in the park because it opens at 8. But I mainly just outside the park. And I don't know why. It's flat and you can watch the sun come up over the city. And it's beautiful in its own way.
I love it. That's great. Well, thank you so much for your time. I want to be sure to plug everything you do at the end here. So these are 2 fantastic books for everybody watching this: Tattoos on the Heart and Barking to the Choir. And I'll let you read the intro. I love that you started this book with the title first and then you backed into the book so people can read about that. One thing that I know is impactful that I want to be able to do, which we'll do after this, is donations are really what carry Homeboy Industries. So I would ask you how people can help, but I know that first and foremost, donations are the most important thing. Is there anything else that you would like people who are local to consider doing?
Yeah, I mean, we have Homeboy silk screens, so we do embroidery and we do screen printing. So if you ever need shirts done, um, Homeboy Recycling, which is we recycle everything, and that's become a business that's growing and has found its footing kind of during the pandemic. And you can still order stuff online, from merchandise to baked goods. So they can send you a tin of cookies right away, and they're quite good. And but donations for sure, because we only get, like, I don't know what it is now, 5% of our entire budget is from the government or public entity money, city, county, state. The rest, half of it comes from our businesses, which have indeed been depleted. Our diner in the city hall is still closed. Farmers markets are closed. We still have Homeboy Grocery, so we sell chips and salsas in supermarkets. So so we're always having to raise a lot of money. I wish it weren't the case, but there you have it.
Yep. Any closing thoughts on ways that people can, it's too open-ended to say on ways that people can help, but if someone's not in LA, I mean, is there something that you encourage people do in their own lives to be more active in their communities, even if it's not with Homeboy Industries, with your inspiration?
Yeah, well, I think the idea always is to imagine a circle of compassion and then imagine nobody standing outside that circle. So our task, no matter where you live, is to dismantle the barriers that exclude. And a good way to start is to go to the margins and find in your local community, the poor, the powerless, the voiceless, those whose dignity has been denied, and those whose burdens are more than they can bear. And you go to them, and the margins get erased because you do.
Thank you so much for the inspiration. Keep doing all the wonderful things you're doing. And I'm sure that you'll continue to inspire so many people, as you always do. So hang in there during this time, and we'll get through it together.
Great. It's great being with you, Andrew. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for tuning in to episode number 1. I appreciate you being here. If you like what you heard, please subscribe to the channel, like and comment on this video. All of that makes a massive difference, and I appreciate your support. Also, please donate to Homeboy Industries. Check them out if you live in Los Angeles. They make it easy for you because their cafe and bakery is delicious. And you should take a tour with one of the homies down there. They're all reformed gang members doing incredible things for their community and the world at large. You might even bump into Father G. He's always around, very approachable guy. Someday soon, you're going to be able to hug people again. You can give them a big hug, take a tour, and all that. Until next time, I'm your host, Andrew Pelosi, and I'm excited to see you soon. Yee!